Have you ever wondered what makes creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lili Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how ideas become paintings or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community, and we'll explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. In our inaugural season, ArtStorming the City Different, we dipped our toes into the vast ocean of creativity with a focus on some of our favorite creators of Santa Fe, New Mexico. That conversation was enjoyed by artists and non-artists alike because it showed us how we can all benefit from learning how to generate something from nothing, dream bigger, charter new territories, and solve problems in new ways. In Season 2, we're going to take that concept of generating our lives with intention to the next level. This season, we're talking about legacy, art as legacy, and how the most creative among us tackle this rich and deeply personal subject. Welcome to ArtStorming, the Art of Remembrance. This episode of ArtStorming is underwritten in part by Zeitgeist Dance Theater and Francisco Gella Dance Works, organizations dedicated to advancing contemporary dance and dance education in New Mexico and beyond. Today, we are diving deep into the intersection of high finance, profound passion, and the delicate art of letting go. Joining us are Sonja Moro from Los Angeles and Michael Duffy from Atlanta of Bank of America's Art Services Group. Now, whether you're a deliberate connoisseur building a personal empire, an accidental collector who suddenly inherited a family treasure, or an artist thinking about your ultimate legacy, today's conversation is for you. We are going to explore the complex, highly emotional world of art planning, from the surprise financial logistics of art lending and tax planning to the honest family conversations required to prevent your beloved collection from becoming an estate hot potato. Let's get ArtStorming. I'm today ArtStorming with Sonja Moro and Michael Duffy from Bank of America, and they are part of the Art Services program. And so we've got LA represented and the East Coast represented in Atlanta. And I've been really so excited to talk to you guys. So welcome to ArtStorming, and we're going to just jump right on in. Either one of you can start, but say a little bit about the Art Services program and what you're set up to do for your clients so that our listeners have a little bit of context for where the conversation's going to go.
Sure. So I am an art services specialist. So really my main job is to help our clients across the full art services kind of platform. And what we specialize in is art lending, so lending against art collections. We specialize in art advisory. So we have consignment services, which is helping our clients maximize when they're selling their artworks through auction. We also work with collectibles that auction houses sell. So I've worked with wine collections, watch collections, things like that. And we do art consulting, which is education and support for clients looking to build or expand their collections. And then, of course, art planning, which is really where Michael takes center stage.
And with art planning, that covers a wide gambit of issues, including philanthropy, using your art. And that can involve either donating your art to creating your own private art museum. My group gets involved with the income tax issues around art transactions, which can be different depending upon whether you are a collector, investor, dealer, or artist. Those are the four categories that the IRS uses. We do a tremendous amount of work around gift and estate transfers and planning and how to get this material down to future generations within your family. We do work around sales and use tax issues when people are buying and selling art. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other things, but we try to give a bear hug around our clients because of these valuable works that they have, right? They're emotional objects, and we want to make sure that we're addressing their goals and also their fears around their material.
Well, that's the perfect segue because you just hit on the buzzword that's the magic moment, which is emotional. Because most of what we're talking about in this series is the emotional component of whether it's collecting or legacy or whatever people are doing. And so since there are these logistical areas that are fraught with complexity, obviously, there's this other whole component, which is the emotional component, which it sounds like you all are very well versed in helping people deal with. And it also sounds like you're dealing mostly with people of means, high net worth clients, ultra high net worth clients. But when it comes to the emotional component, what makes this really accessible, this conversation accessible to an entire audience, is that the emotional component is the same whether you're dealing with a multi-million-dollar collection or a small, quantity of collections. Obviously, it's less complex. But speak to a little bit in your own universes how legacy planning and people's attachment to their things, the process that they use to collect it, and what are they thinking when they're putting together a large collection?
It's really individualized. In my experience, I've really seen things across the realm. I've seen folks who've gotten into collecting because they have a friend who was interested, or they befriended an artist, or they got interested in their local museum and kind of started collecting from there and with no real aim. But then once they had, through this passion and relationship network, really built a significant collection, then you're confronted, right, with like, okay, what do we do? Do I want to help serve my community through a donation to a museum if the museum is interested, or, my college community museum, whatever kind of is most forefront of their minds. Some folks, it's really important to them that the art remains on view. Some folks, it's really important to them that it goes to maybe a smaller community that they have a strong tie to that doesn't have access to those kinds of cultural objects. Some folks really want their kids to take this on and build it. The kids don't always want to do that. So that can definitely be a kink in that sort of legacy planning. And I think some folks can be very practical about it financially. I'm working with a client right now who, through, relationships and strong commitment to the community, has built a large collection, primarily based on artists living and working in LA. But this was, for him, kind of not just supporting the artist, but a big part of his retirement planning. He was always thinking that at some point, when he was looking to take a step back from, working, that he would seriously consider a sale of the work.
In my view, there's really kind of two types of collectors. There's the folks that have actually gone out and purchased a piece. And then there are those people and families I call accidental collectors that have inherited pieces or have been given pieces by friends. And so now they are, possessors of this material. And, I think most people, when it comes to their art, really the emotional part is they really view their stuff as treasures, right? And so that will drive kind of what they intend to do with the material. So you heard Sonja say that maybe they're collecting it so that they're going to pass it down to their children, or they're going to retain the material because they intend to pass it down to their children. It may be that their children don't have the same view of the material that their parents have, right? And they may not consider the material treasure. Maybe they consider it a burden to take on a collection or to receive this material. And so, obviously the stuff doesn't pay any dividends, financial dividends, but putting together a collection has such amazing emotional dividends and philanthropic dividends. And it gives collectors, regardless of the size or the value of the collector's collection, to meet other collectors that are doing the same thing. And so it can turn into these fabulous, social circles and really kind of be fulfilling.
Yeah, well, and how soon do people, in your experience, start a conversation for the succession plan? I mean, you said there were two kinds of different, accidental and then deliberate. Obviously, the deliberate people may be a little bit more organized around thinking about that. But typically, what's your experience there?
I think people get very serious about their estate planning, in their, 50s and above. Although I think any adult with an asset or a child should have a current estate plan in place. But, I think it would be beneficial to have these honest conversations with your children about whether they want the material or not, or what they intend to do with the material or not, because that could guide what the parents want to do. I mean, perhaps the best course of action is sometime during the parent's lifetime, they'll donate it or give it to somebody else, or they'll sell it and not just push it down to the kids to kind of figure it all out. Right. And so the earlier you can get in front of those conversations with your kids, the better. I find that most parents don't include their children in their collecting habits. And so they're not bringing the kids to the fairs and the galleries and the museums, and children are generationally different and tend to like different types of art. And there's all kinds of reasons why a child may not want to receive any materials from the parents. And so the sooner they can find out, the better.
Yeah, it's funny. It just anecdotally reminds me, my stepfather was a collector of British military swords and helmets. And as two daughters, stepdaughters in our case, and he would drag us around to all these military museums and try to interest us in these things, but it just was not landing. And so even though that attempt was made, it just sort of fell flat. But Sonja, what's your experience with your clients? How soon does that conversation start?
I would say, I mean, again, like the most popular answer in the art world, right? It depends. But I think it kind of depends. I think a lot of people who are really, like Michael was saying, like just passionately collecting and building their own personal collection, I don't think it hits them until past middle age to kind of start figuring out, because they're still in acquisition mode, right? They're still going out, they're super engaged, they're building that collection, and they're really finding a lot of joy and satisfaction in that. So that kind of next step doesn't always crystallize until the kind of acquisitive phase really reaches its peak. And then you're thinking like, well, where to go from here? I know some folks who are very involved with museums, they will start having these conversations earlier because they'll be on an acquisition committee for the museum, for example. So they kind of see how the museum acquires, what the museum is interested in, and then they'll have conversations with the museum. What would you want? What should I keep? What should I plan to give to? Those conversations can happen earlier. Also, that's really deepening a relationship with a museum, especially if that individual would like to have a leadership position on the board or things like that. I see those conversations sometimes happening a little bit sooner. With clients who are artists, I see it happening very late. Michael, I don't know if you find that as well, but it tends to happen rather late, and sometimes those can be the most crucial.
I want to take another minute to remind listeners that ArtStorming is a listener-supported nonprofit, and we want to thank Zeitgeist and Francisco Gella Danceworks for their generous support. With their support and yours, we can create more compelling stories, more in-depth articles, and a greater impact on our community. If you love what you hear, please join our efforts. Visit our website for more ways to engage, and thank you for being an essential part of our work. Yeah, well, I'm also curious is what percentage of the people that you're working with are people who are already, say, Bank of America clients who have just sort of figured out that this resource is available to them within the bank, and so they are introduced to you and they sort of bring you their problems and like, oh, or whatever. They don't even perceive it as a problem necessarily, but they realize that this service is available, versus how many people seek you out because you do have these very specific services that you offer people.
Just from my experience being at the bank, I find that our serious collector clients seek us out. They know from their circle of friends and talking with dealers and auction houses that this is a potential problem that should be addressed sooner rather than later. And so they try to get ahead of it. Newer, younger collectors, so people that are just coming into disposable income and they're going out and they're buying some pieces, not so much. Right. This gets to, they tend to be older before they even start to think about estate planning. They're still in the acquisition mode. And so their focus is directed one way and not the other. But, I would also want to mention that you heard Sonja talking about being on museum boards and being involved with philanthropy and museums. So that's a potential source to perhaps down the road donate some of your material during your life or at your death. And the only thing that I would say about that is you have to get in front of those conversations as early as possible as well, just like getting in front of your child, because it may be that that museum, for whatever reason, can't accept your piece, right? It's a lesser piece. They've already got the same artist and better material, so it's redundant. Maybe it's just not right. Maybe it doesn't fit their curatorial vision. There's all kinds of reasons why a museum would turn down the piece. And so that is very good to know so that you can then move on to the next museum and have that conversation. What you don't want to have happen is just assume that a museum is going to take your piece, whether you're on their board or not, and then leave it to them through your final documents, your final will, your trust, only to have that museum reject it and then leave this asset in your estate as a hot potato with nobody knows what to do with it.
Yeah, well, that hot potato thing is a real issue. And I understand that a lot of museums won't accept, say, like a large sculpture unless there's an endowment that kind of goes with it to help support and house and store or whatever. So that obviously there are a lot of complications around that.
Yeah, that's another thing that I try to work with clients for them to understand is that when you donate a piece, what you're really donating is not an asset. I call it an assetability, combined liability, because that asset comes with some extraordinary expenses, right? They have to take the piece in, change their financial systems, teach their docents about it. Now they have to insure it. Maybe there's some repair and work that has to be done on whatever you're donating. And so there's real expenses. And if it's not the Mona Lisa, where people are lining up at the door to come in, it's just overhead. And so museums typically operate on a razor thin budget. And so it is an expense to accept a work. And so, yes, very often in order to accept your work, they would like an endowment to cover those carrying costs for a number of years.
Yeah. And the other myth that I sort of want to dispel for our listeners is that a lot of people just think that, all they have to do is acquire the artwork. And you were just talking about the expense of one piece, acquiring one piece for a museum. People think that they can just dump an entire collection on something and that they reap the rewards of that in some either philanthropic way or whatever the payback is. But it's like the myth that as soon as an artist dies, their artwork suddenly skyrockets in value. So can both of you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that there are many kind of carrying costs of artwork, as you say. Like, take the example of an artwork, an outdoor sculpture alone. Not just is there transport and installation, but also maintenance. If something's outside, there's lots of wear and tear and organic accretions, let's call them, so that they needs regular conservation to kind of preserve the integrity of the work and all these things. But there's insurance. And I mean, this isn't, so much for outdoor sculpture, but other works like, if you're lending them to museum exhibitions or otherwise, if you're moving them between your homes or putting them in storage and storage carrying costs, and all of these things really are part of an individual's financial commitment to owning artwork, especially if that collection is of a certain value and of a certain volume. And then even when the time comes to sell, it's rather easy, of course, to sell artwork that's in great demand, or easier, I should say. Artwork is notoriously challenging to sell. But then more niche objects with more niche markets or very quiet markets, or perhaps no real secondary market, it then becomes very challenging. And again, kind of like what was being said about the museums, it can't necessarily just go, it's not a one-stop shop situation. You can't just go to one auction house or gallery or dealer and say, here's 200 things, let's go. So there is a lot of nuance in executing some of these plans that, if you, to what Michael was alluding, think about that beforehand and lay some of that groundwork, it can make it very challenging.
I have seen maybe 4 times in my life where an entire collection was accepted by a museum, and the collections were magnificent, right? They were one in a lifetime pieces. And so you will, every 5 or 6 years, you'll hear about some major collector passing away and being able to donate their stuff. And that's because all of their stuff was what we would call blue chip, amazing art. So for the 99.99% of us, we'll never be able to donate an entire collection. We may be able to donate a few pieces here or there.
Yeah. And so this idea that art as an investment versus art as something that brings you joy, that you want to live with, that maybe becomes a family project. Of course, we lean towards guiding people towards that second part, but speak to that a little bit in your experience.
So our firm doesn't have a view on whether art is an investment or not, but our clients do, right? And so for the majority of our clients, they don't view it as an investment, right? They buy it because they like it. They covet the art. They're real kind of connoisseurs. And if they, and by the way, most of them never sell a piece. So you can't really attribute a profit motive to what they're doing. They just keep buying and buying. When clients do have a profit motive and they are actively trading, again, very few, but those people are usually in the top of the market where the liquidity is, right? At the major auction houses at Sotheby's and Christie's. And so we're talking about some pretty big pieces. If you're buying a piece that isn't traded at market, and by the way, people can spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars at art fairs buying artists that have never traded at auction. They're going to have a hard time selling that piece for anything. It's just the way the art markets work. And so I run into people that do have a investment premise they're trying to buy the next unknown Picasso that hasn't made it to auction yet. And I don't encourage that behavior, but if they want to proceed with that, that's great. It's a passion of theirs. It's a hobby. And so why not?
Yeah. Sonja, what's your experience?
And I mean, it's interesting coming from prior to my role with the bank, I worked at an auction house and with an appraisal firm. And so the core of those businesses was art and the art world. Whereas here, my corner of being in our art services group is just one small facet in a business that has a much different focus. So now that I'm in a financial context, I do encounter those questions more than I used to necessarily, maybe. But it's true what Michael says, that like most of our clients who are actively collecting, they are not collecting for financial gain. They're in it for many reasons. And people who do approach me with those questions, like, what should I buy? I mean, I always tell them, like, if you want to make money on your money, I have many exceptional, talented colleagues who can kind of help you with these financial investments. But if you're interested in other, like, there's more than one type of investment, right? Kind of like what you were saying, Michael, with like how it can pay all kinds of dividends, including philanthropic. Same, there's so many types of investment. You can invest in your community. You can invest in an artist's career. You can invest in a gallery whose program that you believe in. You can invest in, the quality of your daily life of living with these exceptional objects. So there's so many kind of ways to think about it and so many ways that artwork can enrich one's life in different ways. But there is, of course, the practical aspect of the finances. And there is sort of a tipping point where like an expenditure below a certain amount, I find that like, clients are like, okay, if we're having a conversation, I'm like, look, this is a terrific artwork. If you believe in it, you want it, you can afford it, buy it, but you may not ever see a penny of this money ever again. And like, be okay with that. And most of the time people are up to a certain number, and that number is different for everyone. But there does come a point where like, okay, kind of regardless of your net worth or whatever's going on, people just have different comfort levels with this. And at some point, people do want more due diligence, right? They want a little more context on the artist's work. Like also what Michael was saying, a lot of emerging artists, secondary markets lag behind the primary market, of course, because secondary market is resale. So it's just the natural course of things. And it takes a while for those secondary markets to be established in most circumstances. Of course, recently we've seen some emerging artists with this really like FOMO feeding frenzy and lack of access to works on the primary market really feed into some extraordinary but short-lived secondary market activity. So I think that's just sort of the natural course of things. And it depends on where folks are focusing their collection and kind of what they want to return. But again, I always just want people to go into these things with their eyes wide open And if they are transacting at a point where they want to do additional due diligence, great, let's do it. What do you need to feel comfortable with this? Get that context. And then again, go in with an understanding that's realistic.
Yeah. And I just want to pivot a little bit to say, because you just used the word transactional. And I think that is a relationship that a lot of people are familiar with in the art world. It's that they think of it as a transactional, but when it becomes an emotional experience, and I love what you said, that there are other ways. If somebody, say they've amassed as much artwork as they have walls for, and they don't want to put it in deep storage, and they want to stay engaged with the arts. I love that you just offered that there are different ways for people to engage emotionally with the arts, by supporting an artist, by getting involved with a museum, getting involved in other philanthropic endeavors that are peripheral to the arts or adjacent to the arts without having to be, really in the arts. And so, Michael, I want you to say what was on the tip of your tongue before I interrupted.
I was going to say, just from an investment perspective, there's some really big hurdles for any investor to make money. And so let me just compare it just very quickly to just buying a stock or a bond. So the commission to buy art usually, and I'm just going to do it from an auction house perspective, but a lot of this applies to galleries too. Your commission is about 25% to buy. And then to turn around and sell the art, if you can sell it, you're going to pay a commission. The seller is going to pay a commission of 10%. When you buy art, you're going to usually pay a sales tax. In New York, it'd be 8.75%. Then to hold that art every year, your carrying costs, if you have it insured, is going to be 1 or 2% of the fair market value of that art every year just to carry it. They'll never pay a dividend. And then when you turn around and sell it, as long as you've held on to it for more than a year, your gain is going to be 28% instead of a 20% long-term capital gain for stocks and bonds. So the rule of thumb is the artwork has to double in value for you to even break even. That's a pretty tall order for any investor to go into an investment thinking that they need 100% return on their money before they're going to come out. There's plenty of other investments that look more attractive. Again, you have to have a real conviction if you are going to be a quote unquote investor in the art world.
Well, the good news there is that it means it's, a strong argument for being involved in art for art's sake and for this.
That's right.
And so I think that's the big take home here. And we've now heard it from the banking experts out there. So we can now really pivot. And I'm very curious now to go into sort of your personal experience, what drew you to the arts and to be sort of supporting people through this journey of being a collector, being a legacy collector. So what's your respective stories and how did you get here? And how do you like to do that dance with your clients?
Yeah, well, I started out as a BFA in painting in college and had always been really, attracted to performing arts and visual arts, and kind of by that point had settled on that, but halfway through realized I didn't want to be an artist. So what does one do? I added art history, right? Because that's the practical move. But I have been really lucky because I've had this sort of general interest that through various experiences kind of led me to a place where one door opened to the next. So I was in college and looking for a job, and my roommate was like, "Hey, I found this job on monster.com. You should apply for it." And it was with an appraisal firm. And I don't come from an art collecting family. My parents are not artistically inclined at all. I'd never heard of an art appraiser, didn't know that was a job I could have. So I went to that interview, left with the job, and that really kind of set me on my path. It really opened the door to that there's all these other aspects of the art world that are viable to have careers in. You don't have to be an artist or a professor or a curator. There are auction houses and galleries and all sorts of professionals, art advisors, etc. I have friends who specialize in art insurance and all kinds of areas that you can still be involved in the art world and support the arts, but have a career. And there's really lots of practical sides to the art world. And I've really enjoyed just, getting to work closely with the objects to really understand how the art market works, because it is so singular. And that I find has provided just endless opportunities for involvement and self-education. I think that's what I love the most is it's a very social world. I love getting to know people. I love working with people. I I love helping them achieve what they're looking to in terms of getting involved or becoming more deeply involved. And I also just love learning something new, seeing art, always challenging myself and being challenged by the art around me and the people around me.
Beautiful. How about you, Michael?
Well, I came at it from a different angle, but I think we started at the same place. I was an artist all the way through my childhood and through high school. And when I went off to college in my second semester where I could take my first elective, I took oil painting. And when I brought home my midterm report card, my parents weren't happy. And I was the first time, this is 40 years ago, first time I heard the phrase, wake up or smell the coffee. And so they suggested that I change my elective or find a new sponsor for college. So I changed my elective, graduated with a business degree, went on to get a law degree, went on to get a master's in tax law. So here I am now in a completely different world. But my tax law degree brought me to Palm Beach, where I was working for a very important trust and estates law firm. And they had clients that had massive art collections. And I realized as I started to work with their clients that there was very little written about art law. This is back 35 years ago. There wasn't a single treatise, class anywhere in the world. It was just a smattering of different laws that dealt with the UCC and dealt with, contract law and dealt with, European tax issues. And so I thought, hey, there's really something here for me. And so my entire career as a lawyer, I have tried to job craft it into the art world. And the art world is kind of caught up. And now it's become very, very sophisticated around all the legal issues dealing with these massive collections. And I've just been lucky to ride that wave from the kind of the beginning until where the art world and art legal world is today.
And so that's a perfect place to pivot to, again, what I call soft legacy. So all of these new developments in terms of a structure and framework for the logistic side of it, the legal side of it. When we've been exploring this topic over the course of this season, we talk about legacy as not necessarily the name on the building or the will or the trust fund that you set up, but more what we call the soft legacy, the echo that we leave behind. And what we're trying to encourage people to do is to think about legacy, not because it's this thing we have to do to avoid a problem tax-wise or whatever, but because it's an opportunity for us to think about how we want to structure, if not our whole lives, at least the second part of our life now that we're starting thinking about being a responsible adult. And more than just being a responsible adult, how do we add a layer of vitality and, passion to our projects? And art is certainly a vehicle for that by getting involved in things that can take you outside of yourself. And what I see is an opportunity for families to have that conversation that you were talking about much earlier in terms of engaging the entire family in a legacy project, whether it's collecting or some other endeavors. So what vehicles do you have for helping families start those conversations as early as humanly possible? Because it certainly, there's a missed opportunity, I feel like, if these conversations only happen as assets are being moved from one generation to the next. And what an open opportunity there would be for people to collect as a group. And how do you see that working?
So our firm, as well as many other financial firms, are starting to build internal groups like ours. We have professionals that are very experienced in holding family meetings. And within those family meetings, trying to pull out, what's important to the parents, what are their expectations, trying to also let the next generation be heard. And these meetings can be multi-generational, where we could have sometimes 3 or 4 generations in the same room. And this is a great time for parents and for these discussions to come out about the parents' legacy and what their hopes and wishes and fears are. And that can be related to a number of different aspects of their lives and estate, including their collection, right? And so at these meetings, we often, for example, with younger kids to teach them about philanthropy, the parents will give them a particular donation allowance every year, where the parents will give the child money so the child can donate it to their favorite charity, or allow them to make the donation from the family's donor advised fund. And that way, you teach the younger generation about sharing and the importance of that, right? Same thing at these meetings. You could do the same thing with art, where you can provide to get them involved in your passion, in your collection pack. Give them either a budget or give them a vote, right? So form a family committee and have the whole family decide on what the next piece is that they're going to assess into the family collection. And that can be really exciting. So those are some of the kind of tools that we try to show families that have these big collections.
Yeah. Is it working? I mean, do you see that happening? I mean, that makes my heart so happy to hear that actually exists.
Yeah, I think the families that use these services are thrilled with them. And sometimes these are conversations that wouldn't be as transparent or honest if you didn't have an unrelated third party in the room that kind of understood how to run a potentially dynamic. And so for them to be able to make sure that everybody's heard, and that maybe there are potential issues that the families don't know, they don't know yet, right? But based upon our experience after listening to the family share, what's important to them, we can add to and hopefully come away with a better solution for the family. Like there could be a family that has, a nice collection, and now and 3 kids want the same work. A piece of art is really not divisible. And so that then, you have to, either the parents are going to have to suss out who's going to eventually get that work of art, or they're going to have to kind of do a compromise and come up with some sharing agreement, whether it's, they drop the art into a trust, and then the kids as beneficiaries each have a right to take the art for a number of months or years before returning it so that the other child can enjoy it. And so, again, getting ahead of this, trying to figure out what the children really want. And then if there's a jump ball, if children want multiple pieces, it's a good time for the parents to either make the decision to send a piece to, a particular child and just kind of get in front of that. And that's always helpful, by the way, rather than making it a surprise at the end of the day through with the parents' will as who's going to get what. Being able to do that when mom and dad are alive, so that mom and dad can speak to each child about the reasons why they're doing something or not doing something. Because the one thing that, a good estate plan should always strive not to do is after mom and dad are gone, we don't want the planning to pit one child against the other, right? We want everybody to get along. And so for mom and dad to be able to get in front of the stuff, make sure everybody, kind of understands the plan, where things are going, that can prevent a lot of family arguments after the parents are no longer here.
Yeah. You just made the perfect case for we're creating something called the Art of Legacy Toolkit. So for families that don't have the benefit of a service like yours, that they can sit down and use a structured way to move through conversations like this. So that's one of the things that's coming down the pipeline that we're going to be offering to the world. And what's your experience with that, Sonja?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the experiences where people didn't have these conversations, and people who thought it would be totally fine because they all get on really well and have a really great open relationship. This can really sour that, I think. So I think that's a really great incentive to maybe have those hard conversations, or what may seem like a hard conversation, but doesn't necessarily have to be. And like Michael said, sometimes a great strategy can be to have a third party with you to really help these conversations along. Because, I think we can all agree the one thing no one wants their legacy to be is something that spawns strife and division in a family or, a group of people who were at one time quite close. So I think that's always a good motivation. And I think on the kind of side of starting to have these conversations early, I think in my practice, Michael knows I loop him in a lot just to say, hey, we have this incredible, knowledgeable colleague, it's a great time to talk to him about, even if it's something more practical about a specific transaction, somebody looking to sell something, let's be aware of what those tax implications may or may not be. And then sometimes something like that can open the conversation up to, well, why are you selling? What do you think about the rest of the collection? What about your kids? What about your other affiliations to, nonprofits or whatever? So sometimes I try to use some of those practical things as a way to start opening up that conversation. And then even too, when I have initial conversations with folks about, starting their collections and education around getting going, I usually do try to bring in that aspect of, you don't need to decide now, but I think it can be a real guiding light in how and what you choose to collect, of like, maybe you don't need to know this on your first purchase, but, I think plant the seed of, what do you want to become of all this? How are you looking at this? This art will live on beyond you. That's an incredible thing, and what a privilege to be a part of its journey. And how do you envision that journey continuing?
Well, I love the fact that the bank is offering this way of for people to think about their lives more holistically. I mean, we tend to think of a bank as this institution, could be intimidating for people if you're not accustomed to trafficking in that world. But this idea that you're there to help people address issues that are beyond just the fiscal considerations, right? And so do all of the branches offer services for this? So if I'm just in, I don't know, the Midwest somewhere and I want to start a collection, is a banker a good place for me to, like, how does one initiate a conversation with one's financial institution to bring them into this thinking?
So our group is considered a specialist group within the firm. And what that means is that we are available to every advisor in the system, which means we are available to every client in the system. So yeah, the first stop would be to talk to your local contact person in whatever state or city that you're in. And then they would put them in touch with somebody within our group. And then we would take over the conversation from there.
And do all banks offer this, or is this unique to Bank of America?
It's offered by several major banks, not all of them. But as you go down to what we call RIAs or other kind of money manager firms, they tend not to have a specialized art services group.
And I would say ours is probably, I think, certainly the most mature, largest, and kind of most built out. I've been with the firm nearly 4 years now, so I'm a newer member of the team, but our group has been around for over 10 years. And I think really matured and grown as we've seen a real demand from our clients and real success in how we can really help be holistic for our clients in these relationships and speak to them about what they're passionate about and things that matter beyond, of course, the financial matters, which are important as well, but to have that kind of broader relationship and support.
And do your services go beyond, say, the visual arts? I mean, do you have clients that are interested in art philanthropy that involves the music or performing arts, or are you mostly in the visual arts?
All over. So Bank of America, I think, is the largest contributor to the arts in the United States and has been for over a decade. So the firm is very, very philanthropically motivated. Just an example is we have this amazing program where we distribute millions of dollars every year to major museums and maybe not so major museums that have applied to have a work restored. Right, masterpieces restored, and but the question, I'm sorry, I got lost. The question about philanthropy
Beyond the visual arts.
Yes, of course, we have clients that are interested in opera, or just stage and theater. You name it, our client, whatever passion you can think of, we've got clients that are actually participating in that particular endeavor.
And is it mostly the visual arts for your particular group?
Well, you say visual, but we do a lot of work in collectibles too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, collectibles, clients have valuable car collections. They have valuable rare manuscripts. Maybe they have a valuable comic book. I was just working with a client last week that had several major comic books that could sell for, I think, over $1 million a piece. And another client a couple weeks ago that had a valuable baseball card collection that nobody even knew existed until they swept out grandma's attic and found these cards. And so, and with that particular case, for example, the first thing that I told them to do is to get those cards graded. There's a separate service that will grade baseball cards and then hermetically seal them in a case so that we can have them appraised before we decide, and they want to sell them, decide which auction house or specialty dealer we'd go out to have those pieces monetized. So we get to see some really interesting collectibles, but and we get to see our clients just engaged in the arts across the spectrum.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because when you think of, we've been talking about legacy at the family or a personal level, but then there's institutional legacy. And so, it seems like what you guys are building and what several financial institutions are trying to do is something that it's certainly not new, because as I think I shared with you when we were on our first call, that, I did a study of Chase Manhattan Bank and their art collection. And, so banking institutions since the Medicis have been involved in the arts and philanthropy and the arts. So it's certainly not new. But I think it's important for us to remember that as an institution, there is a legacy that is being cultivated here. And you all have your own art collection, I believe, as well at Bank of America.
We have a beautiful, beautiful art collection, and just a fraction of it gets, just like any other museum or institution, a fraction of it, I think, gets actually displayed around our real estate around the world. But historically, banks had, the part of their commitment to the arts was to go out and buy art from new and emerging artists, right? And so it wasn't for financial reasons. It wasn't a pure just handout, right? So that's the way many of these major museums built their collections. And, you can look at the pieces now and they could be worth millions of dollars, but I assure you that when these banks bought them, they probably had a budget of less than $1,000 to buy whatever they bought.
Yeah, but you guys are very committed to building that collection and continuing to support the arts in many philanthropic ways, right?
Yes. And I will say, we are a collecting institution, but that is not the major thrust of our current arts philanthropic endeavors. We put the collection to work actually in service of this. We have a program called Art in Our Communities, where our wonderful curator has put together a number of exhibitions using works from our collection. And we loan those exhibitions out to museums and other cultural nonprofits, usually in smaller, markets, who wouldn't necessarily be able to afford exhibitions like this. And we cover all the costs of loaning them that exhibition. So we're very active in that. We do a number of those every year. Michael mentioned the Arts Conservation Project, which is a grant for the conservation of an artwork or cultural object. We support objects around the world. We've Notre Dame after the fire. We are helping several of those buildings. Starry Night by Van Gogh and MoMA, the, Winged Victory Nike at the Louvre, just a few very famous ones. But that's a very active project. I think they give away between maybe 12 and 24 grants a year, just depending on the size of that. We're very active, of course, in our museum partnerships and sponsorships. So Bank of America cardholders can access, I think it's around 300 museums globally for free the first weekend of every month with their card. And we're consistent exhibition sponsors. So we're currently sponsoring the Duchamp exhibition at MoMA, amongst many others. So I would say that our philanthropic endeavors, and we do the performing arts as well, of course. We've been longtime sponsors of Alvin Ailey's traveling company and the Center Theater Group here in Los Angeles. So I would say that yes, but we really are focused on access to the arts for the communities that we serve, and really kind of putting both the art and our dollars to work to make sure that everyone who wants to have access to art and experience great art can have that opportunity.
Yeah. And have you found that it seems that your commitment to the art must be more for the art for art's sake, since it is the philanthropic arm, as opposed to, I think some cynical listeners might think, oh, well, this is just sounding like a big advertisement for Bank of America, which is not my intention at all. My intention is really to show that all aspects of our society and culture are part of this art fabric of bringing the arts, making the arts available to people. And it's, we think it's a very critical component of culture and society in general. And we're very grateful for institutions that can afford to support the nonprofit sector of the community, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do nearly what we're doing. And I think it's critical for a healthy culture to be very heavy on the arts, as heavy as we can be. And, I guess what I'm thinking of, I come from kind of a banking family, and, sometimes there's a divide between what Michael experienced as smell the coffee and go get a real job. This idea that we have to live in life in a very performative and transactional way. And then it kind of leaves the arts as this forgotten stepchild that, is petitioning for acknowledgement and to be seen and to be loved and to be understood. But I think what we see when those of us who've devoted our lives to this know that there is no life, in the complete sense without, addressing the arts. So in the time that we have left, I don't know, say whatever comment comes to mind based on what I just said.
I think with saying that there are two sides to the same coin, right? Because the arts are perhaps on first glance, a nice to have, quote unquote. But they're in fact an enormous economic engine for a community, right? Arts provide jobs, real jobs. Arts are an attraction for tourists. Arts are, for better or worse, artists find a neighborhood that has inexpensive studio space. And generally speaking, where the artists go, cool kids follow. And then those neighborhoods experience what some might call gentrification and what some might call economic revitalization, or a combination of both. So I think these are really two sides of the same coin. And for one of the things that attracted me to working at the firm, what the bank's financial commitment to the arts in terms of philanthropic support has kind of happened from the beginning, like even before it was Bank of America. And that real commitment attracted me to working here, to be a part of that, and their belief that to be holistic in the space, that both support this kind of logistical transactional side that is really the engine that, the art market the secondary market notwithstanding, the sale of art supports the artists that make it, right? So all of this is the engine that makes it possible to keep, artists and creators as, a viable life path for someone, and also in our various communities to enrich them in the many ways that they do. So I think all of this is really of a piece, and kind of one supports the other. And I think it's a very active and welcoming place because, of course, a lot of this activity, is certainly not to, put our name and commitment out in the world, but it's also because it is a really important part of having the communities that we serve thrive, both economically and, spiritually, emotionally.
Thank you for that. Michael, bring it home.
Oh, my goodness. I would just say that, from my perspective, and it's really coming down to a planner's perspective, quote has floated around our art world for a while, but, life is short and art is long. And so there's no time like the present to plan for your art, because you never know when you won't be around. And so that's my advice, is better now than later when it comes to planning.
Perfect. Well, I'm just one burning question. Are you doing any oil painting still?
Actually, I'm doing charcoal sketch right now.
Excellent. And how about you, Sonja? Did you go back into the studio ever?
No, not really. But it did give me a deep appreciation of what it takes. Creative work is work, and what it takes to really produce something that communicates your ideals and ideas. It is a really massive commitment. So it provided me with both logistical understanding of how these objects are made, as well as the kind of commitment it takes and belief it takes and generosity it takes and bravery it takes to be an artist.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for this wonderful time. I knew it was going to be great. I've been so excited to bring this perspective to our listeners because it's definitely a piece. We had somebody on the show last season who was an art appraiser, so we got a little taste of that. She was an appraiser for the IRS, so that was a very interesting conversation. And then we also had somebody who specializes in helping artists bring their sort of catalog resume into being. So we didn't go as deeply into that, but there's a whole separate component of this that is just very targeted towards how does an artist deal with their legacy as, of their body of work. But thank you so much for being here. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners? Or if not, we can just leave it there.
I mean, just thanks to you. This is also such an endeavor to put this together, and having listened to some, I just want to say thank you. It's really wonderful. And thank you for all the work that you're doing, because it's really enriching. And this is just, I'm really just thrilled and feel really honored to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and an honor to have been on your show.
Thank you so much. Well, both of you, to be continued, I hope, and I will continue having conversations with I guess the Merrill Lynch. We didn't get to talk about that, but a local Merrill Lynch person who is somehow, I don't know how the whole thing works, but Merrill Lynch and Bank of America are somehow related. And so our local branch is a Merrill Lynch branch, and I can plan to continue having conversations with that team. And thanks to them for bringing me to you and for you to the audience. So
yes, very much. Thanks to Roxanne.
Take care. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So thanks for joining us today. Support for ArtStorming comes from Zeitgeist Dance Theater and Francisco Gella Dance Works. You can find them at franciscogelladance.com and zeitgeistdancetheater.org. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge NM and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms or wherever you listen. Your subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares help us to reach more listeners and attract the support we need to thrive in these challenging times. If you love what you hear, please consider making a contribution. We rely on your help to keep these conversations going. Every dollar you contribute goes directly into programs that support our mission. And we've been offered a matching grant that will match every dollar that you contribute. That means more compelling stories, more in-depth articles, and an even greater impact on our community. Please visit our website at www.artbridgenm.org, and thank you so much for being an essential part of our work.